Hello there, I'm Lloyd Evans. Welcome back to The Bunker. Today, I have the absolute privilege of speaking to Michael Shemwell. Michael is a life coach and host of the Shunned podcast, where he interviews those who, like him, have faced ostracism for leaving various cults, including Jehovah's Witnesses. Michael, thank you so much for joining me.
I'm happy to be here, Lloyd. Actually, it's nice to finally meet you. I've seen so many of your videos over the years.
I've certainly admired you from afar. Probably admiration is too strong a word for you to apply towards me. But in any case...
No, admiration is great. In fact, I'll give you a shout out. A lot of the people on my podcast, a lot of times I'll ask them what helped wake them up, and it was something of yours. So
that's lovely to hear. Well, we kind of operate in the same space.
Yeah,
but it's still very important to, touch base and see what's working, what isn't working, and most importantly, learn more about your background, because I'm sure there are many of my viewers who perhaps would find that interesting. So,
sure.
How was your life impacted by Jehovah's Witnesses?
Well, my life didn't start out being impacted by Jehovah's Witnesses. I was about 8 years old when we, through a chance real estate transaction, ended up moving next door to Jehovah's Witnesses. And my mom really hit it off with the neighbor lady. Next thing you know, she's studying probably the Live Forever book back then. And, within a couple years, a year and a half.
Because I am back in the bunker, I can't resist.
Okay. Uh-oh, we got to break it out.
Yeah. You see, this is something I wasn't able to do when I was on the road. So here is the Live Forever book that Michael is referring to.
Oh, yeah, that was a popular one back then. I'm pretty sure that's the one that she studied. And, of course, the rest is history, right? Suddenly, life changes. We are no longer hanging out with our extended family. We've become more isolated. We are no longer celebrating any of the holidays. And, life changed quite a bit, at 8 years old. So I don't know how far you want me to go with it, but that's where I started.
That's very helpful. I mean, obviously, I was literally born into it because my parents were believing when I was born. In fact, they would routinely tell me that they almost felt bad having me because of that verse that says, "Woe to the pregnant woman in those days," or something along those lines. So apparently it's dodgy to have children when you're this close to Armageddon, or as close as we were back in 1979 when I was born. So goodness knows what it's like now.
Yeah, I'm sure
40 years on. I mean, obviously, people can be born into the religion or they can join from a young age, but, not everyone gets as involved in the religion as everyone else. So to what extent did you get involved?
My family, I would say Uber dubs. We definitely, you were at all the meetings. My dad was an elder. I remember as a kid, right off the bat, my parents started auxiliary pioneering. And so it was a matter of, going to school, coming home from school, going out in an air-conditioned station wagon in the heat of the summer, knocking on doors after school. The days that, of course, we didn't have meetings, and then going out all weekend as well. It was just, it took over our whole lives. And then, as far as myself, I was baptized when I was 14. And then at 19, or 18, I was a regular pioneer, ministerial servant at 19, and got married at 20. It was right before I was 22. So just, and then life changed. Life changed a lot once I got married. I was trying to be a family man, a husband, a brother in the congregation, a friend, myself, just trying to be all of these different roles that you need to be, and found it all quite overwhelming to try to keep up with everything. It was just too much.
Well, 22 is, let's face it, very young
Oh yeah.
to get married. I'm aware that lots of people do get married younger than that, but nevertheless, especially when you are so insulated in your upbringing and
Oh yeah.
not remotely worldly wise. In fact, if anything, fiercely distrustful of the world and underinformed as to, how basic things work. Yeah, it is a shock to the system, I can imagine. So was married life challenging for you then?
Yeah, I mean, you have two
You've got to
dumb
be
kids.
diplomatic at this point. So
Oh, I'll be straight with you. We were two dumb kids that should have never got married at that age. I mean, it's just, my wife and I joke about it today about how, we wish we'd have met each other later in life because we bear the scars of what we did to one another throughout those years. Because, we were two kids coming from a dysfunctional cult, coming each from our own very narcissistic, dysfunctional families. And we didn't know how to be in a healthy relationship. And so I was probably more narcissistic. She was more codependent. And it just didn't work. It was honestly really rough. I will say that I think if it wasn't for Jehovah's Witnesses not allowing one to get divorced, otherwise you get shunned and your God murders you, I believe that we maybe probably wouldn't have still been together. And even when we eventually did leave, we had to have a discussion as to, is this what we want? Was this ever real, or was this just because we shared a common belief system and the criteria for getting married or finding a mate in the congregation is, do they come in at the meetings? Are they regular in the ministry? Do they hold any privileges if they're a brother in the congregation? That doesn't make for a happy marriage.
You mentioned before, kind of took me by surprise when you said that you were narcissistic.
Oh yeah.
And that's kind of a big thing to say, because I suppose, to varying degrees, we all have that in us. But very few of us are honest and open enough to kind of say that. So are you able to give examples of how you were, how you could be described in that way during those early years? Yeah,
I was just very controlling. It was, and again, it was a dynamic, and part of it, a common theme in our marriage was I needed to step back so that she could step up. Okay. Because I was really just, she came from an even more isolated background than I did. No TV in their family, had no exposure to anything, homeschooled, just no real life experience. And I had been on my own since I was 19. I guess I moved out on my own, mostly to get away from my family. And, I had lived some life on my own. And so, we got married. She didn't know how to do much, not an indictment on her. She just wasn't exposed to anything. And so it by default became my way or the highway. You know what I'm saying? It just, I was the family head. I always hated that term. I didn't want to be that. But I think that the dynamic itself sets up a situation in which, I'm just a stronger personality. And so I was taking over, and everything was just ended up kind of being my way by default. I think the hallmark, or the thing that was the worst, probably that caused the most scars, is there was something my wife used to ask for all the time. And I didn't understand it. I didn't know what she wanted from me. And she would throw her hands up and say, I guess you just don't have it. And I'm talking like probably the first 10 years of our marriage. And as I started getting healthier mentally and emotionally, learning about emotional abuse and narcissism and all these different things, I can't remember what book it was, but I was reading a book and it started talking about empathy. And I was like, holy crap, this is a thing. Human beings are supposed to have empathy. Nobody ever cared about my feelings. I didn't know I was supposed to care about anybody else's. I thought that logic mattered, being stuck in your head, and then intellect mattered. Feelings don't matter, because I grew up in a cult that moralized everything and where there was no allowance to be a human being and to have feelings or psychology or to be seen or heard or validated. So, much like I guess you would say an elder in a judicial committee just checks the boxes and sees if you're following the rules or not. That's pretty much how I viewed life. It was just feelings don't matter. And it was I had to apologize a lot for that because I didn't know. And I was just so embarrassed when I realized that empathy was a thing. It was just, I was shook. I didn't know that could exist, because you're not supposed to really care about the feelings of others. Your greatest hope is that 8 billion people are going to be slaughtered by your God so that you can live in a panda paradise. You don't have empathy for people. You can't, not and survive in that emotionally, or I couldn't in that environment.
And yet somehow your marriage survived all this. I'm assuming you're both still together. So in other words, the wife that you have now is the same one we're talking about.
Yeah.
So, because I know that she's done a lot of work on the podcast as well, hasn't she?
Yeah.
So how were you able to stick together? And at what point did the penny drop that you were in a cult?
So staying together. Well, as Jehovah's Witnesses, again, you're not allowed really to get divorced. I think that we probably would have split if, all things were equal, because we just weren't ready for everything that came, and in a lot of ways we had to grow up together, and it was very difficult. It was very rocky because we were given really zero chance of making it, coming from the environment we came in. So let's see, how did that all go down? So we not only were married, but we also worked together. Back then, had a cleaning business, cleaned houses, typical Jehovah's Witness things to do for employment. And but by working together every day, we did have, although things were rocky a lot in certain ways, they were also really great in other ways. And the one thing that we always kept was an open mind toward working on ourselves and our relationship. So there was no point at which either one of us was saying, well, I'm not going to change, or I'm not willing to try to grow. And by doing so, we did grow together throughout the years. She had a lot of trust in me, probably because I was taking control of so many things, and she saw that I was making wise decisions in different parts of life. And there came a point, so I don't want to skip over this, because I need to give shout out to my wife. In 2008, I was very suicidal. It was trying to run that rat race of being one of Jehovah's Witnesses, and it wasn't that I wanted to die. I just didn't feel like I could. The common refrain I hear as a coach working with ex-Jehovah's Witnesses and in my podcast talking with ex-Jehovah's Witnesses is that feeling of I was never good enough. I could never be enough. And for myself, I didn't feel like I could ever be enough. No matter what I did, I was always falling short of this perfectionistic standard that I had internalized for myself and that, Jehovah had for me. And so I just didn't see the point. I didn't really understand myself. My marriage wasn't great. I was trying so hard and nothing was working. And I just didn't see the point in being here anymore. And so during that time, I have to say, I just want to shout out my wife because she was extremely supportive of me. I went to the elders at one point, and I didn't tell them I was suicidal, but I told them I couldn't keep up. And I didn't understand how other people were doing this. And I wanted to be a fly on the wall and understand how other brothers were managing to do more, be more all the time, right? And they basically just shamed me and told me, well, it's just a matter of choice. We do what we want in life, and obviously you don't want it bad enough. And so I left that elders meeting, and I remember telling my wife, and I'll never forget the moment, but I said, I guess I just don't want it bad enough. And she looked at me and said, honey, you want to kill yourself over this. You clearly want it badly. It's not that you don't want it bad enough. And that was kind of a wake-up call along with some other things. Fast forward, I start doing lots of research into, again, mental and emotional abuse, narcissism, vulnerability, just really got into reading a lot, researching a lot of different things, and just getting perspectives from outside of the organization by listening to podcasts while I cleaned, and started getting a different perspective of life. And eventually I came to realize that Jehovah's Witnesses, the thing that stumbled me, I guess, or the first thing that started waking me up was, where is the love? There's no love in Jehovah's organization. It's control. Control is not love. That's not allowing someone else to be who they are and loving them for who they are. It's very narcissistic. They want you to fit into a tiny box and to reflect who they are, just like a typical narcissist. So I started noticing at the meeting things that were said about people on the outside that didn't add up and that were just hateful. I couldn't keep my mouth shut. And so after every meeting on the way home in the car, I'd just be ranting about something horrible that was said at the meeting and just how unloving it was. And, we're supposed to love people and go to their doors and want to save them, but yet we talk about them like they're just garbage people. And over time, she didn't like it, but there was a moment where we were headed to work one day, and I finally I got her to open up, and I said, look, we all have doubts. Every Jehovah's Witness has some sort of doubt about something, whether it's what really happened to Jephthah's daughter, or why did Jehovah kill the guy who prevented the ark from falling over, or whatever. We all, there are things that don't add up. What are we going to do in the paradise forever? What's the purpose of a mosquito? I thought blood was sacred, just like all these things. And so I just said, look, if you have doubts, let's just talk about them. We're married. We should be able to, if we can be intimate in other ways, we should be able to talk about this. And you admitting your doubts doesn't change anything. There's still the same doubts. And if you don't like this conversation, you are free to pick up your doubts, put them back in your pocket. We don't have to talk about it, but can we at least give it a try? And that was the beginning of the end for Jehovah's Witnesses, because then she had apparently my doubts were organizational. Her doubts were about the Bible. She had been reading the Bible, particularly the Old Testament or Hebrew scriptures, trying to figure out what all this was about. And she couldn't, circle that square. It didn't add up. That God is very awful. And so then we just kind of let each other go at each other's pace. And over time, we came to a point where, it's a story, and I don't want to go too far. If you have any questions about what I've said, I can go farther, but.
No, that's fascinating. So, because in my own experience, I very much woke up first, and then I had the task of waking up my wife. I know the first time I ever said it like that to her, she was like, "You didn't wake me up." And I was like, "Yeah, you really would have woken up at this pace by yourself, if not for the fact that your husband was giving you all of these issues to contend with." And she's like, "Yeah, maybe." But I kind of woke up a year ahead of my wife and kind of relied on the fact that she would be trying to salvage me, and therefore would be instigating conversations that would lead to me explaining my viewpoint. And just over time, because she's a very intelligent woman and doesn't appreciate being lied to, she followed suit. But it sounds like in your situation, you both kind of said, let's just put all our doubts on the table, and that just, from what you're telling me, let the genie out of the bottle.
Pretty much. I think I really found out kind of in the moment. So my wife used to write talks, and then she'd kind of run them by me sometimes. And I realized, and there were times where I had to say, "Jenny, you can't say that. We don't believe that." And I think I kind of realized in that as the genie was let out of the bottle that I don't think she ever really solidly believed it. She was around it. She didn't know what else to do but that. But I don't think that she ever really internalized it all a lot. I was fully in. I believed it all. I was deep, but I don't think she was. And so honestly, it was kind of one of those matters where it's like, watch what you ask for. Because then she was really quickly like, well, let's just let this go. Like, why are we doing this? And I was like, whoa, 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 I'm not ready yet. So she started going faster than I did. And I was like, I had to pull the reins up and say, hey, maybe it's because I hadn't looked at the Bible. And so when she would start telling me things about the Bible, I was having a hard time facing that. I wasn't ready to see all of that yet. And in fact, I would say that, so our path out was eventually the last thing we ever went to was the international convention in Indianapolis it's like 2014, it's 2013, 2014. And we had gone and my wife was looking for some reason to hold on. And we got there and there's no lonelier feeling than feeling alone in a crowd of like 40,000 people. And at halftime, during lunch, she was in tears because she was like, there's nothing here for me. And then I don't remember if it was before or after lunch, but one of the governing body gave a talk. And in it, they were talking about, I don't know, some brother who had a 6-figure income and he quit that job and went to work part-time retail. And, he may have only been making, $18,000 a year or something. But the reality is that with the tax brackets like they are, he was actually making more money now. And it's like, that's bull. That's math. And what he didn't realize.
That's the sort of thing you can only say if you're a completely sheltered governing body member who's never actually operated in the outside world and you've only ever been gifted things through doing the traveling work or living in Bethel.
And the reality is what he wouldn't have known is that my wife and I just stopped going to meetings and pretty much quit for 18 months because we owed the IRS $58,000 because we were so terrible with our money and no one had ever taught us anything and we didn't know how to save and we thought the world was going to end. And so we buried our head in the sand and let this debt amount to, astronomical figure. So we spent 18 months working 6-7 days a week, cleaning houses, saving up enough money to pay off the $58,000 plus the taxes on top of that. All we did was live, eat, breathe, cleaning for 18 months to get out of that debt. And now I'm sitting here listening to some jackass tell me that I guess I could have just worked part-time in retail and paid that off magically because Jehovah. So I was pissed off. My wife was in tears. She was like, if we go, we can beat the traffic. So we left that convention. We left that convention about 3/4 of the way through the first day of the international convention. And on the way back home, we agreed that we would never go back. I had a brother who had been disfellowshipped. I don't know. I'm bad with time. So I'm just going to say 13, 14 years before I was waking up. And again, I was learning about love and psychological health. And I realized that I was just psychologically manipulating him by shunning him for all this time. And that it was about the worst thing you could do to another human being. And so I found him on Facebook and I reached out to him and I apologized. And, I understood if he didn't want to talk to me anymore or ever again. If he wanted to shun me, essentially, even after my apology, I was like, hey, I get it. I deserve it. And he was like, hey, I get it. I understand why you behaved that way. I was a Jehovah's Witness too. And so we kind of started reconnecting. We talked. And then I guess our big act of rebellion was my brother lives in Manhattan and we live in Indiana in the United States. And so I made it known that I was going to go see my brother, my disfellowship brother. He had never, he was married, he had been married at that time for years. He had no existence before the age of 20, whatever, when he left. And so I asked my mom, I just told her, because I knew this was the end. And I said, hey, I'm going up there to see Matt. And can I get like some childhood mementos, some pictures of him as a kid, anything that you saved that I could take to him and help him to have some past. And, you know, his wife has never seen a picture of him as a kid. He has no existence before that age. And she kind of surreptitiously at a meal, we met at a restaurant. I found out my sister was calling it the Last Supper on Twitter. She apparently had a secret Twitter. I didn't know. And she was calling it the Last Supper. It was the last time we were going to meet. And my mom surreptitiously got us, she had a little bag and she gave us some things to take to my brother. And I believe that was the last time that we ever saw them. We disassociated. So my wife and I made a pact that we would go, we went and saw my brother. And then if the elders ever started harassing us, then we would disassociate. We weren't going to play that game where they stalk you and they call you and, you know, you have to block numbers and all that ridiculousness that they do. And so we went, we saw my brother, my wife's family saw the pictures we put on Facebook of us going to see my disfellowship brother because we weren't going to hide it or be ashamed of it. They deemed her an apostate, instantly shut her off. So we were already shunned by our families, and we decided, look, you know, the elders started calling. They started stopping by the house and trying to catch us. And I said, let's just, you know, we made that pact. So we sat down, we wrote goodbye letters to our families. We mailed those, waited a couple of days, wrote disassociation letters, sent those off, put a bullet in it, and we were done.
I can imagine people watching this, because I do have a lot of viewers who've never been Jehovah's Witnesses. They just find all of this fascinating, pretty much how you'd find it fascinating when you're driving past a car crash on the freeway. You just cannot help but have a look. And lots of people take this attitude towards Jehovah's Witnesses, and stories like that, I mean, how do you explain that to a normal person, that that's the sort of thing that goes on? But interestingly, I'm sure you know this, but it's only a disfellowshipping offense if you have contact with a disfellowshipped person, if you're not their relative, and you were clearly his relative, but you were just concerned, I assume, not so much about being straight up disfellowshipped for doing that, but more about the kind of snowball effect of elders starting to take an interest in you and coming and hounding you and that sort of thing. Would that be fair?
Yeah. So it was that, obviously, I didn't have access to the elders manual. I didn't know that to the shepherding the flock of God.
You thought you might be disfellowshipped.
I thought I could be disfellowshipped for it. But regardless of that, my wife and I, by that point, we used to talk about how we wanted to get that stank off of us. We didn't want to ever be mistaken for or identified as Jehovah's Witnesses. And we kind of felt like, and I know there's a lot of, there's honestly a lot of stigma in the ex-Jehovah's Witness community against those at times who do disassociate. And I know that, you know, and so I'm an advocate of leave however you want to leave.
Exactly.
It's a brave and beautiful thing to do that. However you feel you need to leave for you. For me, I took a stand when I went in, and I needed to take a stand when I went out. I wanted it done. I needed that closure. And I felt for myself, and again, I'm not impugning this upon anyone else, but I felt for myself like continuing to stick around was giving tacit approval to the things that I had learned were going on within the congregation and the organization. And the Australian Royal Commission hadn't even happened yet. That happened right after we left and just cemented like, yeah, I made the right decision there. But, you know, I needed to be done. And I think there's a level, I even told my mom one time as a Jehovah's Witness that I felt like I suffered from JW PTSD, that just living in that fear and always looking over your shoulder and worrying that someone was going to find out that I liked rap and listened to Eminem and was clearly a horrible individual for doing so and deserved to be slaughtered by Jehovah. But, always worried that somebody was going to catch you in something, right? Not that I was living some horrible life, but just, I don't know. Everybody's always watching everyone else. There's a lot of paranoia there. Who's going to turn you into the elders for this or that? Or, did you not get enough hours out in service or whatever the case may be? I just didn't want to deal with any of it anymore. I didn't want them to be my authority in any way, shape, or form. And honestly, although I am the guy that does the Shunned podcast, and I'm all about how shunning is wrong, I'm going to say that few things in life are all good or all bad. There's a yin and yang to life. And shunning keeps a lot of very toxic people out of my life and away. And I don't even have to set boundaries with them. That is the boundary. And
well, the difference is that you've decided that. You've not been ordered to
yes.
shun them. Yeah.
Yes.
And you mentioned earlier that obviously while you were a Jehovah's Witness, you reached a point where you were suicidal. Mm-hmm. What impact or what, if any, difference was there on your mental health after leaving?
Well, I was already starting to get, I had been, so 2008 is when I'm suicidal. September, I think it's the 2nd of 2015 is when we disassociated. So I had 7 years there of waking up mentally and emotionally and getting healthier and healthier. But I have to say, I don't know how I don't know how to quantify it. I don't know how to really even put words to the freedom, the instant letdown of anxiety. It's just like the biggest sigh you could ever have, just letting everything out, knowing it was done. And it was behind me. There was no one to answer to. Now, at that time, I have to be honest, I still kind of believed in Jehovah. And I still kind of believed that maybe Jehovah's Witnesses still even had some biblical truth, but maybe I could just go be like an independent version of my own Christian, okay? At that point, I hadn't yet looked into the Bible. That all fell apart too. But I can't, it's indescribable, the relief that I felt knowing that it was all done and I no longer had to worry about any of that stuff. It was over and I could just move on.
So net positive for your mental health.
Absolutely. Huge positive. One of the best, if not the best decision I've ever made in my life.
Excellent. And I want to take you back as well. I was fascinated to hear about you talking about going into, I think you said $58,000 worth of debt with the IRS. I had a similar experience, not with the IRS or with they call it HMRC in the UK, but just in general, I had the same situation, me and my wife, where we were both pioneering. We were newlyweds, and we just carried this assumption that if we were doing everything that we could to serve Jehovah, everything would magically sort itself out so that we could take out as many overdrafts and credit cards as we wanted and use those to pay our bills and go to the bottom of our debts on those lines of credit. And sooner or later, it's all just going to come good. And of course, that didn't work. So when we finally moved to Croatia, again, still fairly naive, thinking, oh, well, when we're in Croatia, things will be blessed and things will magically improve. We were in so much debt that in the end we had to go on they called it a debt management plan, where you basically it severely impacts negatively your credit rating, but it basically means that you, rather than having to worry about various different creditors, you're just paying like a lump sum every month, and at least it's, at least you're working your debt down. And that took years, but we finally managed it. I'm wondering, now that you've told me your story, I'm wondering just how common that is, because Jehovah's Witnesses do have this hopelessly naive attitude that, oh, Jehovah's going to provide, he's going to sort it all out, and it doesn't matter if I have the most menial work, I don't have to worry about getting well-earning jobs. In fact, it's preferable if I don't have a well-earning job, because that's going to enable me to serve Jehovah better. You do wonder how much of a drain on people's mental health that will be, the fact that they're completely broke all the time.
Huge. It was huge for us. It was a huge drain. But what I will say made it easier is that I had been taught the skill of denial my entire life. Okay. I denied who I was. I denied what I liked. I denied how I felt about people on the outside. I denied when I would see something that caused cognitive dissonance, and I held one truth to be evident and then saw something that contradicted that. I denied the contradiction because I was taught denial. So as the tax debt grew, I knew it was a problem, but eventually it just got to a number that I had never seen in my life. And so it was easiest to deny it until it got to a point where I was finally waking up enough to see this isn't working anymore. And I realized that there are very scary ramifications. They could have taken our house. They could have started taking our cars. They could have, the IRS has the power. Well, and I experienced on the state level having the government come in one time and scarf my bank accounts. They just took it all. And so I went to buy groceries and had no money. So it got real. And it got so real that I could no longer live in denial. And so that was my waking up moment, from that part of denial, right? And that allowed me to say, I told my wife, there's no debtor's prison, but we're about to do hard time because there's only one way out of this. And that's to work like dogs and get this taken care of, because otherwise this will never end.
Or rob a bank. But presumably there weren't any banks that you could rob without getting away from.
At one point we cleaned some banks.
Okay. You cleaned some banks, but not of the money. So,
yes, we did not clean them out.
Okay, fair enough. So, wow. So much to unpack there. And you've since, of course, interviewed many who have had similar experiences. Are we on dozens of people that you've interviewed now on the Shunned podcast? What have you learned, do you think, interviewing so many people?
So first I told my story on my first podcast, which was This JW Life. So that's the entirety of my story. And then I started Shunned because people kept coming to me saying, help me tell my story. And I was like, I don't know if I want to. I'm kind of done with this. I don't know that I want to be like an activist or a personality. But everybody wanted me to. And I said, you know what? There's something here and I'm going to at least explore it. Why not? I think I'm 83 episodes in now, and it's not just, and so my podcast is long form stories. So these are 2, sometimes 4 hours of someone unpacking their life. And it's primarily ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, but like I just released one on Scientology, FLDS, just recorded one on the Unification Church, Amish, Mennonite. There's a lot of other groups, even a small racist family cult. So lots of different cults are represented there, but it is, of the 83 episodes, probably 75 of them are ex-Jehovah's Witnesses. And I've learned just so much. I've learned how strong people are, how much people can, people can go through a lot and come out the other side. I've learned that we tend to devalue our own story. So one of the things, and again, I am I practice as a cult recovery coach now and a life coach, and I work with people who are leaving Jehovah's Witnesses or who have left. But a lot of people will say, like, I don't think my story is valid. It's not as bad as such and such's story. I wasn't raped in the congregation or molested, or, my parents didn't beat me or whatever. But all stories matter. And not everyone did experience abuse at that horrific range. And I didn't either. And people loved my story. And so I think everyone needs to own their story. It's yours. It's not anyone else's. And when you own your story, and what I find when people tell their story on my podcast, and I'm sure you've probably found similar things as people do on yours, is that when someone tells their life story, and then they can go back and listen to their life story in one nice little tidy package, told it once in a logical, coherent way, you get a different vision of yourself. You're hearing your own story projected back at you in your own voice, but on a platform or a medium that you're used to listening to other stories on. And suddenly it allows you to emotionally give weight to what you went through and to see. I've had people who've had just really horrific, homeless at 14, abused, just awful, beaten, all these things. And then they listen to their story and they tell me, wow, I really went through some stuff. It's like, yeah, you did, man. Like, you're kind of a badass, and you need to give yourself credit for that. We are all so much stronger. We sometimes feel weak because we've been beaten down, but we are all so much stronger than we give ourselves credit for. And yes, we have a lot to work on. There's a lot of growth because we were given distorted ways of seeing ourselves and seeing the world around us. And there are patterns that we replay, roles that we were given as kids that we play out in our relationships and our careers and everything else. But that's okay. Everybody else has those issues too in life. That's not necessarily unique to us. We just have unique circumstances that caused it. And so it's all workable and we can all heal from that stuff. And so I just love seeing the results of having someone tell their story and then realize, yeah, I've been through some stuff and it's real. And I'm probably a lot stronger than I give myself credit for. And also, I might be glad that some of those people are no longer in my life because that's messed up.
So it is cathartic for you to be bringing this platform to people, and it's Absolutely. Cathartic for them to be able to share their story and realize that what happened to them is a big deal and is wrong and was abusive, and to be able to process it from a different perspective. So that's wonderful.
Yeah, I think the moment that you lose it, the moment that it stops being cathartic for you, you need to take a break at a minimum, because you're either burning out on it and it's too much, or maybe you need to talk to somebody because maybe it's triggering some things in you that you need to look at. But for me, at this point, with all the work I've done and all the healing I've done, the moment that I fail to appreciate what everybody is bringing to the table and discussing these things is the moment that I realize that I've lost something and I need to go find it again. Because how can you lose empathy and appreciate the beauty or joy of people leaving something like this? I don't want it to ever become normalized to the point where I'm deadened to the feelings of all of this.
So you can see yourself doing the Shunned podcast for a bit longer. I
hope so. Hope to at least hit 100 episodes this year, right?
Absolutely.
Hit my 100th episode. That'll feel good. I'm just saying, I'm sure you get it. You get all the emails from people who, look, being an activist isn't easy. I'm going to speak to you a little bit here. It's not easy. You know this. You can't please everyone. Someone's always going to be unhappy with something you've done. You're going to catch hate. It's part of the deal. But if you focus on all the beautiful examples of people that you've been able to help, all those hours that we spent, you and I and other people who are out there telling their story, trying to help people as Jehovah's Witnesses, knocking on their door, trying to indoctrinate them, never helped anybody. Seeing people reach out who are finding help or found help through my work, through your work, it's a beautiful thing. And it's humbling to realize that you can actually do something now that matters. And it just means the world.
Absolutely. Well, please carry on with what you're doing. It's making a huge difference, I'm sure. The way I tend to end these interviews is to ask if you have a message for anyone watching who's perhaps still on the fence about their faith and whether it's worthwhile taking the leap to break free from it. Obviously, you've been quite emphatic on that score, but what would be your advice to anyone watching who is still uncertain as to whether they ought to part ways with the organization?
First of all, take your time. You don't have to make a decision today. You've been through a lot. There's a lot that has gone into this process. Be kind to yourself. Actually love yourself, which I know can be hard to do because we've been taught not to do that. Realize that these beliefs are something you were given. Everyone is born an atheist. Everyone is then given something to believe in. And everyone is an atheist to somebody else. Jehovah's Witnesses are atheists to Muslims. Muslims are atheists to Jehovah's Witnesses. So they don't believe in the same God. So whatever it is that you have that you believe, if that is all you've ever been influenced by, if that is all you've ever known, you owe it to yourself to at least give yourself the chance of exploring life a little bit, exploring what is out there. How can you say you have the truth if you don't know what else is out there? You do more research on an Amazon purchase than on your faith. So at least, it's just like politics in the United States here today is so divided and people are at opposite ends of the spectrum and there's the us and the them and we all hate each other and all, it's just so hard. But if you watch a little bit of this media and a little bit of that media, you can start to piece together where things are, okay? If you feel like you have the one and only truth, you owe it to yourself to look at something else because chances are you're being unduly influenced by one thing because it's all you've ever known. And I guess a quote that really impacted me is, run with those who search for truth and run like hell from those who claim to have found it. So be on the search for truth, be humble enough to search for it. And if you really value it like you've been taught your whole life, then you better make sure you got it.
Wise words. Michael, thank you so much for joining me for this interview. And again, keep up the excellent work.
Thank you. You too, Lloyd. Love what you do.
So viewers, I hope you've enjoyed this conversation. I certainly have. Don't forget to subscribe to the Lloyd Evans channel for more such interviews and videos. But for now, thank you so much for watching.